The woman they were sending out of Millhaven on the Friday coach was standing in front of the dry goods, when Vera Holt decided the whole street should know it. It was market day. Vera had chosen that on purpose. 3 weeks I've asked for what you owe me, Vera said, loud and deliberate, the way a woman uses a voice she has spent years sharpening. 3 weeks you've eaten at my table and told me the money was coming, and I am done being told. She turned to the street then, not to Edith, to the street, which was the whole point. $6 she owes this town, and she will be on the Friday coach whether she buys the ticket herself or not. Someone laughed near the back. A few others shifted their feet and looked away, which is what people do when they want to be somewhere else but cannot justify leaving yet. Edith Marlowe stood with her bag at her feet and her hands loose at her sides. She had a stillness about her that some people read as guilt, and others might have read differently if they had been paying a different kind of attention. She was not going to give the street her face. She had learned that much in enough towns before this one. Boone Garrett was outside the mercantile loading salt into his saddlebags when Vera started talking, and he did not stop what he was doing, but his hands slowed. He had 2 daughters on the horse behind him, Nell, who was 6 and had her mother's habit of leaning into things she wanted to see better, and Ada, who was 12 and had lately developed the habit of watching crowds the way a person watches something they have seen cause damage before. He knew the name Edith Marlowe the way a small town knows every name that moves through it. He knew she had been 3 weeks at Vera Holt's boarding house. He knew what the town knew, which was not much, and he knew the thing the town had been repeating to his face since February, that he had 30 days from the county notice to demonstrate a household fit for 2 daughters, and that 30 days had a way of getting shorter without asking permission. Vera said that a woman with no husband and no people and no accounting for herself was a debt to any town that kept her, and that this town had kept her long enough. Nell leaned too far trying to see. The shutter above the mercantile came down hard against the wall, a loose hinge that had needed fixing since October, and the horse felt the shifted weight and the sound at the same moment, and that was enough. The animal went sideways and Nell came off into the dust, and the sound she made when she landed was the kind that empties a street of everything except itself. Boone was off the saddle before the horse finished moving, but the reins were in his hands and Ada was still behind him and the horse was still going, and the 10 feet between him and his daughter on the ground was 10 feet he could not cross. Edith was already there. She did not go for the horse the way the men near the rail did, shouting and reaching, which was the wrong instinct and would have made it worse. She stepped into the animal's line of sight and held her ground and brought her voice down to something quiet and level, and she stayed there until the horse found something in her stillness worth matching. Then she went to her knees in the dust beside Nell and said, plain and clear, "Don't lift her. Let her breathe first." 2 men who had been reaching stopped. Nell breathed. Then she cried, the real sound, the kind that means the body is doing what it should, and something in the street came loose that had been held very tight for 30 seconds. Edith checked what she checked, her hands moving with the ease of someone for whom this was not the first time, and the people watching could see the difference between a woman guessing and a woman who knew exactly where to look. She did not explain herself to the crowd. She pressed 2 fingers below the collarbone and asked Nell to breathe again, slower. "It hurts," Nell said. "I know. Breathe again." Nell breathed. Edith sat back on her heels. Then she looked up, not at Boone, at Ada. She was 12 years old and her hands, at her sides, were shaking. The rest of her did not know it yet. Edith helped Nell to her feet and kept one hand on her until she was steady. Boone reached them a moment later and crouched to look at his daughter and then looked up at Edith, and what passed between them in that second was not words and did not need to be. At the edge of the crowd, Vera Holt had not moved from the spot where she had been standing when the horse went up. She was watching Boone walk toward her now. He put $6 in Vera's hand without looking at her. Vera looked at the money. "Your money's better spent on a lawyer, Garrett." The county notice doesn't care who's keeping house. He didn't answer. He turned back to where Edith stood with Nell. Edith crossed to him. That was my debt, she said. Not yours. It's paid, he said. That's all it is. She looked at the coach at the end of the street. He looked at it too. You have somewhere to be, he said. She didn't answer that directly, which was its own answer. He looked at his daughters, Nell still close against his side, Ada standing slightly apart holding a bag that wasn't hers. He looked back at Edith. I've got 2 girls and nobody at the house, he said. It came out already decided, no ornamentation. Edith was quiet a moment. Then, I'll take care of your daughters and ask nothing else. Call it what I owe you. He held her gaze. Then he nodded once. Ada held the bag out to her. Edith took it. Nothing more was said. They moved off the street together, the girls on the horse and Edith beside it, and the crowd watched them go and stored it up for later. At the far end of the street the Friday coach sat with its door still open. Nobody moved to tell her the seat was hers. At the edge of the crowd, Vera Holt watched them until they were gone, and her face had the particular stillness of a woman who has already decided what she is going to do next and is simply waiting for the right morning to do it. The track to the Garrett Ranch ran 3 miles east, and Edith walked the length of it beside the horse without being asked to ride. Nell watched her from the saddle with the open curiosity of a child who has not yet learned that staring requires managing. Ada sat behind her father with her eyes on the road and did not look back once. The house sat at the end of a yard that had been kept but not tended, a porch step loose on the left side, the kitchen garden gone to wild at the far row, a window on the upper floor with a cracked pane held together with a strip of cloth. None of it neglect exactly. All of it a man and 2 children doing what they could. Boone took the horse to the barn. Ada went inside. Nell looked up at Edith with both hands clasped behind her back. You can come in, she said. I'm allowing it. Ada already had the pot on, beans, cornbread, the kind of supper a 12-year-old learns to make because the alternative is no supper. She worked without looking up, and Edith sat at the table and let her, because the kitchen was Ada's. They ate mostly quiet until Nell set her spoon down. Why was that lady saying those things to you in the street? Nell, Boone said. Was it because you don't have anyone either? Something like that, Edith said. Our mama died. In February. She picked up her spoon. Do you have a mama? Not anymore, Edith said. Then you're like us, Nell said without sadness and went back to her beans. Ada said nothing. She ate with her eyes on her bowl and her shoulders held in the careful way of someone listening to something they do not want to be caught listening to. Boone stood to clear his plate. On the way back from the stove he refilled Edith's coffee cup without being asked and did not look at her when he did it. After supper Boone showed her the storage room. They cleared it together without discussion. He took the rope, she took the harness. In 20 minutes the room held a cot, a blanket at the foot, and a candle on the sill placed there by Nell, who had followed them in and out and apparently decided it was needed. Boone stood in the doorway. It's not much, he said. It's enough, Edith said. She lay on the cot and listened to the house settle, the creak of the upper floor, the press of wind off the open land, and through the thin wall, Nell's breathing, slow and entirely trusting. She was up before the light. It was in looking for the salt that she opened the wrong cabinet. The county notice was pinned to the inside of it. She read it twice. The first time her eyes moved too fast, the way they had moved across a different paper in a different kitchen when she was 8 years old, held above her eye level by a man in a gray coat so she could not see it clearly, which had not been an accident. 30 days. Household found insufficient. Absence of stable female presence. Documented school absences for Ada Garrett, age 12. Placement to be determined pending inspection. She closed the cabinet. Ada came into the kitchen and stopped, then went to the counter and cut bread. Edith poured a cup of coffee and set it beside her without a word. Ada looked at it. Then she picked it up. Upstairs, Edith found the bag, packed with the careful neatness of someone who had been thinking about this longer than they had been doing it. A folded dress on top. Nell's stockings rolled along the side. Ada's good ribbon laid across everything as though she had decided at the last moment to include it and had not let herself take it back. On the chair, Boone's good shirt, folded. His boots beneath it, polished to a standard a 12-year-old had no reason to know unless she had spent time thinking about what her father would need when she was no longer there. On the table, in Ada's careful handwriting, a list. Where the salt was kept. When the horse needed water. Which board on the porch step wanted watching. Edith stood in the doorway and did not go in. The knock came 3 deliberate beats. Nell appeared at Edith's side without a sound, both hands finding the fabric of Edith's dress and holding on. Vera Holt stood on the porch with a man in a gray coat whose eyes moved past Edith immediately into the room behind her. Miss Marlowe. This is Mr. Aldous Crane. He's been asked by the county to assess the Garrett household. Crane stepped inside without waiting. He opened his ledger and looked at the kitchen the way a man looks at something he has been told to find fault with. The sparse larder. The cracked pane. The worn floor. He wrote things. Ada came down the stairs in her Sunday dress, hair pinned back with care that had cost her time. My name is Ada Garrett. My father is in the upper field. I understand there have been school absences. My sister was ill. For days. I stayed to care for her. I completed the assigned work at home. Crane looked at Nell, the small scratch on her jaw, already fading. He wrote it down. Edith watched and understood exactly what column it was going in. The current female presence. Since when? Since yesterday evening, Edith said. Vera's expression did not change. It did not need to. References, Crane said. Previous employment. I've done household work in several towns. References, he said again. She had none he could write down. They both knew it. He closed the ledger. The household does not meet the county's requirements. I'll need to speak with Mr. Garrett. I'll return. Vera followed him out and turned once at the door with the expression of a woman who has not finished and wants that understood. Nell released Edith's dress one hand at a time. Is he going to take us? No, Edith said. It was not a promise she had been authorized to make. She made it anyway. Ada went back up the stairs and her door closed with a sound that was very careful and very final, which was worse than if she had slammed it. Boone came through the back door an hour later with the look of a man who had seen the gray coat on the road and spent the last mile home understanding what it meant. The girls, he said. Ada's upstairs. Nell's at the table. Nell held up her drawing. A horse, 2 figures, a house with smoke from the chimney. She had given the smaller figure yellow hair. Boone looked at it for a long time. Then he went upstairs. Above the ceiling, no voices. Only the silence of 2 people who have stopped pretending they are not broken, which is the first thing that has to happen before anything can be put back together. When Boone came down, his eyes had the quality of a man who has been somewhere hard and come back still standing. He sat. Edith set a plate in front of him. Nell showed him her fence and wanted to know if gates were a different thing. Gates are part of the fence, Edith said. They're just the part that opens. Nell added a gate. Boone said it was the right size. Ada came down at dark and did her schoolwork and did not speak, and the lamp burned between them. Edith stayed at the table until the last of them went to bed. She had been 8 years old and had not known what to say when the man with the ledger asked his questions. She knew now. She knew which answers closed a file and which ones opened it. She knew one day and a swept floor meant nothing. She had 29 days to make it mean something. She was not 8 anymore. And this time she was on the right side of the door. She had memorized the ledger page in the 40 seconds Crane held it open. The sparse larder, the cracked pane, the worn floor, Ada's absences, the scratch on Nell's jaw. Not by trying. The way you memorize the details of a room you've been told you can't stay in. The window was first because it was simplest. She found a rag and linseed oil in the barn, a piece of cut glass on the storage shelf close enough to the size, and replaced the pane herself on the second morning before Boone was back from the field. Standing on the chair with her sleeves rolled to the elbow, fitting the glass the way someone fits a thing they've fitted before. When Boone came in for midday, she was back at the counter and the window was whole, and he looked at it for a moment without speaking and sat down and ate his dinner. The larder was harder. She went into town on the third morning, before the street had filled, with 3 things in her bag. A shirt of Boone's with a split seam, a wool coat of Ada's with a hem coming loose, and her own hands, which were the only references she had that couldn't be argued with. She went to the dry goods and spoke to Mrs. Hallett, who had a voice like someone permanently disappointed by the world but who looked at the seam Edith showed her with the attention of a woman who knew workmanship. "I'll mend for what I need from the counter," Edith said. "Whatever wants doing." Mrs. Hallett looked at her the way people look when they've heard something about you and are measuring it against what they see. "There's a pile in the back room," she said. "Winter coats, mostly." Edith spent the morning in the back room and came out with cornmeal, dried beans, 2 jars of preserves, salt, oats, and enough credit for the following week. She carried it back in 2 trips and put it in the larder and did not mention it to anyone. She sent Ada to school. Not with a speech. She simply had breakfast on the table at the right hour and Nell's hair done and Ada's lunch wrapped in cloth on the counter. And Ada stood in the kitchen doorway in her school dress and looked at all of it and understood that the reasons she'd stayed home, the mornings too long, Nell too young, the house too much for one man while also being a man, had been quietly removed. Ada picked up her lunch and went. She did not say thank you. She did not need to. It was the following Saturday when Boone went into town for fencing wire and came back with the particular quiet of a man who has heard something he doesn't know what to do with yet. He sat at the table and did not reach for his coffee, which was the tell. "Vera Holt's been talking," he said. "I expected she would. She's saying you've got no people. That you move from town to town. That a woman like that has no business being around children." He looked at the table. "Harmon at the feed store, man I've bought from for 6 years, gave me my change like he was handing it to someone he felt sorry for." He said it flatly, without self-pity, which was somehow worse than anger. Like I was something to manage. Edith sat down across from him. "Is any of what she said untrue?" He looked at her. "I have no people," she said. "I have moved from town to town. Those are facts. What she's made of them is her own construction, but the facts belong to her the same as they belong to me." She held his gaze. "The question is whether you believe what she's made of them." He was quiet for a long time. "No," he said. He picked up his coffee. The church social was the kind of gathering where not going was itself a statement, and Boone was not a man who made statements he hadn't decided on. He went with both girls and Edith walked beside Nell and the town watched them arrive. It went quietly for an hour. Nell ate 3 things from the table and reported on all of them. Ada stood at the edge of the room with 2 girls from her school and was almost, for that hour, 9 years old the way 9-year-olds are supposed to be. It was Reverend Moore who broke it. He put his hand on Boone's shoulder and said the congregation was praying for the family and that if Boone needed a character reference for the court he had only to ask. He said all of it loudly enough. Ada heard it from across the room. She came across the floor with a stillness that Edith recognized and Boone did not see until Ada was in front of him. "You told him," Ada said. "Ada, you told him we might be taken." Her voice was level and terrible. "You let the whole town know and pity you and pray about it like we're something that happened to you." Her hands were perfectly still. Mama died and you went somewhere you haven't come back from, and now the county is going to take us because you couldn't find your way back, and you're standing here letting people feel sorry for you about it." The room was very quiet. Boone stood with his coffee cup in his hand and said nothing. His face had the look of a man who has been told a true thing in a room full of people and has no argument and no shelter. Ada walked to the door and went through it. Nell put her hand in Edith's and held on. Edith looked at Boone. She did not go to him. This was not her ground. She took Nell outside and the cool air met them, and Nell pressed against her side and didn't speak, which was the most adult thing she had done in the 2 weeks Edith had known her. They walked home. Boone and Ada came separately. Nobody spoke at supper, and after the girls were in bed, Boone sat at the kitchen table with both hands flat on the wood and looked at the lamp. "She's not wrong," he said. "No," Edith said. "After Margaret died, I could keep the land running and keep them fed, and I couldn't do the third thing. Whatever the third thing was." "The third thing was being here," Edith said. "Present. In the room and in it." He nodded. He already knew. Sometimes people need to hear the thing they know said out loud by someone not inside the grief with them. "Crane is coming back," she said. "And when he does, the larder will be full and the window will be whole and Ada will have a clean attendance record. But none of that is what he's actually going to decide on. He's going to decide on whether this household looks like a place where 2 children are being raised by someone who has chosen to be here. And that is not something I can fix from the kitchen." "What do I do?" he said. "Tomorrow morning, you walk Ada to school." "She won't want me to." "No," Edith said. "She won't. Walk her anyway. Not because she wants it. Because you're her father and she needs to see that in your body before she can believe it in anything else." He didn't answer. But he didn't argue, which in a man like Boone was the same as a decision made. He walked Ada to school the next morning. Ada did not speak the whole way. She walked with her books against her chest and her chin level and her eyes on the road, and Boone walked beside her with his hat in his hand. He'd taken it off at the gate without knowing why, and Edith watched them go from the porch and understood that the not knowing was the point. When he came back, he sat at the kitchen table and picked up the mending from the basket beside him and looked at it. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "The mending? Any of it being—" He set it down. "Visible." "You walked her to school," Edith said without turning from the stove. "You're sitting in the kitchen at 8:30. That's 2 things you didn't do last week." Something in his face let go of something it had been holding a long time. It was 4 days later that Ada found the paper. She wasn't looking for anything. Searching the back hall shelf for the spare lamp glass, she found instead a folded document near the bottom of Edith's bag. She didn't unfold it fully. Just enough. Placement order. County of Marsh. September 1869. Subject: female child, age 8, name Edith Louise Marlowe. Household found insufficient. And beneath the family's name, in different handwriting, added later, placement dissolved, 1873. Subject relocated. No forwarding record. Ada folded it back and put it in the bag and went downstairs. Edith was at the table mending. Ada sat across from her, opened her school book, and began to read. After a while, Ada looked up. The quadratic problem on page 41. "I don't understand what it's asking." Edith set down her mending and looked at the page. They worked through it together, and Ada's pencil moved slowly and then less slowly, and she got it right on the second attempt and wrote the answer in the margin in her careful handwriting. She didn't look up, but her shoulders had come down from somewhere near her ears. A girl who had put something down and was deciding she did not need to pick it back up. Crane came on a Thursday. The same 3 deliberate knocks. Nell heard them from upstairs and came down on her own and stood in the kitchen doorway, not pressed against Edith this time, just standing near her, which was a different thing. Boone opened the door. He had come in from the field an hour early, and he was sitting at the table with Ada's schoolbook open in front of him when the knock came, not because Edith had told him to be there, because he had decided to be there, which was entirely different, and Crane would know the difference, and so would Ada. Crane came through the same way he had before, eyes moving, ledger open. He looked at the larder full. The window. Ada, sitting at the table with her signed attendance record beside her hand. Boone, who met his gaze without apology or performance. He looked at Nell's drawings on the shelf, 7 of them now. In the latest one, all 4 figures were inside the house, the door was closed, and there was a star above the chimney. Crane looked at it for a long moment. Then he closed his ledger. "I'll submit my report to the circuit court. You'll receive correspondence regarding the judge's determination." He put his hat on and left. The kitchen held the silence of 4 people who have been holding their breath and have not yet decided it is safe to stop. Nell went to the shelf and straightened her drawings so they were even. Ada put her attendance record in her schoolbook and closed it and put it in her bag for tomorrow, because tomorrow was a school day and she was going. Edith started to clear the cups. She heard him move. She thought he was going to the barn. But his boots stopped on the other side of the table, and when she looked up he was standing there with his hat in his hands, looking at her with the expression of a man who has arrived somewhere he did not know he was going until he was already there. "Edith," he said. "Just her name. The way you say a thing when you've finally found the right word and it turns out the word was simpler than everything you tried before it." On the table between them sat a small envelope with the county seal, left behind, or placed deliberately, impossible to know. A date in a clerk's careful hand. 3 weeks. Edith picked it up and held it and looked at Boone across the table, and neither of them spoke, and the kitchen was warm, and outside the afternoon was going gold over the flat land, and there was still time. There was still exactly enough time. The night after Crane left, Boone opened the envelope at the kitchen table. Edith sat across from him and did not pretend to be doing something else. He read it once. Set it down. Read it again. "Circuit Court," he said. 14 days. "I know," she said. He looked at her. "You knew what it was when he set it down." "Yes." He set it beside the lamp. "Tell me what to expect," he said. So she told him, not from reading but from memory. The room, the table, the judge behind it. She told him she had been 8 years old and sat in a chair too big for her while adults discussed her life above her head, and that by the time she understood the language it was already decided. Boone listened without interrupting, without looking away. "What did you say when they asked you questions?" "Wrong things. I told them I was fine when they could see I wasn't." She looked at the letter. "That's what they write down. Not what you say. What your face does when you're saying it." He was quiet a moment. "That's how you knew what he was writing." "Yes," she said. "Then I'll tell the truth," he said. She looked at her hands. He looked at her. "You didn't have to do any of this," he said. She didn't answer that directly, which by now he understood was its own answer. He put the letter in the drawer. Edith thought later, lying on her cot, that it was the first time she had told anyone that story and had not felt afterward like she had handed something away or said too much. Mrs. Greer left a package on the porch 3 days before the hearing. Dried apples, a jar of honey, a note that said, "The coat has held through 2 washings." In a town where most people had pulled back like a tide going out, 1 jar of honey on a porch was its own kind of declaration. Boone found it in the morning and brought it inside and set the honey jar in front of Edith's place at the table. Not the center. Her place. He did not remark on it, and Edith understood he was filing it in the same permanent place he filed everything else, who had stayed, who hadn't, and what that meant going forward. The morning of the hearing, Ada was already in the kitchen in her Sunday dress when Edith came downstairs, pressing the hem flat with her hands because the iron had been cooling since before anyone else was up. The result was not perfect, but it was thorough, which was the same thing in the ways that mattered. Nell came down holding both ribbons out. Ada. Which one? Blue, Ada said. But I want yellow. Then why did you ask me? Because I wanted you to say yellow. Ada took the blue ribbon and tied it in Nell's hair with the brisk efficiency of someone who has done this 10,000 times and has opinions about how it should go, and Nell submitted with the patience of a child who has learned that some battles are not worth the ribbon. Boone came down in his good coat, shaved, his boots cleaned. He sat at the table and poured coffee, and nobody ate much. Nell went to the shelf and looked at her drawings. Then she took a piece of paper and drew for 10 minutes with total concentration and held it up. A building with columns, a gate on the fence, a chimney with smoke coming out of it. For the judge, she said, and folded it carefully into her coat pocket. Boone looked at Edith over Nell's head. Something passed between them that had no name yet and did not need one. The circuit court convened in a town called Harlan. The judge was a man named Whitmore, older than Edith had expected, with the tiredness of someone who has presided over too many of these and wants each one resolved cleanly and finished. He asked Boone the standard questions. Boone answered them truthfully and without performing the answers, and there is a difference between those two things that a tired judge notices without being able to explain why. Then Whitmore said he had received a written statement from Mrs. Vera Holt and read it aloud. It was all true. Vera had not needed to invent anything. The truth arranged correctly was more damaging than any lie. No references. No people. Placed as a child herself. Moving from town to town with no fixed history. Edith sat with her hands in her lap and did not look away while he read it, because looking away was the thing she had done at 8 years old and she was not going to do it again. Miss Marlowe, Whitmore said, is this account accurate? Yes, she said. He waited. I was placed at 8 years old. I have no references because I have been working in households that needed the work done rather than the paperwork filed. Everything Mrs. Holt has written is correct. She paused. I would add one thing she hasn't. He looked at her. I know what it is to be the child in this room. I know what it costs them to sit in chairs this size and be discussed. I know what they need someone to do before a hearing and what they need someone to do after, and I know it the way Mrs. Holt does not, because I lived it rather than observed it. She put her hands flat on the table. That is the only reference I have. I am offering it anyway. Whitmore wrote something. Then he looked at the girls. Does either of you have something you wish to say? Nell's hand went into her coat pocket and came out with the folded drawing, which she held up across the table with both hands. I made this for you, she said. It has a chimney because houses should have chimneys. The room went very quiet. Whitmore looked at the drawing for a long moment. Then he looked at Ada. Ada sat straight, hands in her lap, nothing performed. She knew what the notice meant before my father did, Ada said. She fixed the window. She filled the larder. She walked my sister to school so I could go myself. She did all of it without being asked and without telling anyone she had done it. The careful pause of a girl who has thought about this sentence. That is not someone who is passing through. The judge looked at his ledger and wrote something and closed it. I will send word within the week, he said. They rode back mostly in silence. Nell fell asleep against Edith's arm before they reached the edge of Harlan. Boone drove with his eyes on the road. Ada looked at the country going past. Nobody spoke about what had happened in that room because they were all still inside it. That evening, after the girls were in bed, Edith sat on the edge of her cot and looked at the wall. Nell had pinned 3 drawings to it: the house with smoke, the horse, the gate. On the nail by the door where Edith's coat hung, Ada's spare ribbon had been placed there so quietly that Edith had only noticed it that morning and had not moved it, because some things are better left to simply be what they are. She was still sitting there when Boone stopped in the open doorway. He looked at the drawings, the ribbon, Edith on the cot with her hands in her lap. Not packed, not going anywhere. If they rule in our favor, she said, the case is closed. I have no standing to stay beyond what the situation required. He turned the chair with the broken spindle around and sat on it backward with his arms across the top, the way a man sits when he has decided to be somewhere for a while. My wife used to leave her shoes exactly where she stepped out of them. Every evening. Right there by the door. He looked at the floor. I moved them back to her spot for 6 months after she died. Every night. Then one morning I didn't. He paused. I don't know why I'm telling you that. I do, Edith said. He looked at her. The window didn't need you. The larder didn't need you. I could have managed those. He looked at the drawings on the wall. Ada needed you. Nell needed you. He met her eyes with the plainness of a man who has rehearsed nothing. I needed you. Not the house. Me. He stood and walked to the door and stopped with his hand on the frame. The ribbon is Ada's, he said. In case you were wondering. I wasn't wondering, Edith said. The corner of his mouth moved once. He went out. Edith sat alone in the room with the drawings on the wall and the ribbon on the nail and the window whole and clear, and she understood that she had just been asked something, and that she had not said no, and that in this house that was enough for tonight. The letter came 3 days later. A writer from the county, early, before breakfast. Boone took it from him at the gate and stood in the yard and read it, and Edith watched from the kitchen window and could not read his face from that distance. He came inside and set it on the table open. Favorable determination. Household found stable and sufficient. Case closed pending no further complaint within 90 days. Nell appeared at her elbow. What does it say? It says you're staying, Boone said. Nell considered this. Then she looked at Edith. We knew that, she said. She picked up the letter and examined the county seal. Can I have the envelope for drawing on? Yes, Edith said. Nell took the envelope and went to the table. Ada came downstairs, read the letter standing without sitting down, said nothing, which was Ada's version of everything, and then put the coffee on. Boone looked at Edith across the kitchen. She looked back at him. 90 days. The same kitchen, the same lamp, the same shelf with its row of drawings. The bag still on the floor where it had lived since the first night. Everything still unsaid between them, which was not nothing. It was the particular fullness of two people who have run out of reasons not to stay and have not yet found the words for what comes next. Outside the morning went on the way mornings do when something has been settled that was a long time settling, and the smoke from the chimney went straight up in the cold air, and the gate on the fence stood open the way Nell had always drawn it. The 90 days passed the way good things pass, too quietly to mark while they are happening, only visible looking back. The porch step Edith had noted on the first day was solid by the end of the first week, nailed flush without ceremony, and she stepped on it one morning and felt it hold and said nothing and did not need to. Her mending basket moved from her room to the kitchen shelf sometime in the third week. She did not move it, and Boone did not move it, and it was simply there one morning where it had not been the evening before, which meant Nell had moved it and considered the matter settled. Ada set 4 places at the table on a Tuesday morning in October. She had been setting 3 since February. She did not remark on the change. She put the 4th plate down the same way she put the other 3, without ceremony, without looking up, and went back to the stove, and Edith stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at the table and then looked at the window and did not trust herself to look at anything else for a moment. It was a Wednesday evening, 3 weeks after the letter, when Nell said the thing. She was at the table with her drawing paper while Ada did her schoolwork and Boone read and Edith mended. And the lamp was between them and the fire was working and the kitchen had the sound and warmth of a room that has been occupied long enough to have stopped noticing itself. Nell looked up from her drawing. She looked at Edith. She looked at Boone. She looked back at Edith with the unhurried assessment of a 6-year-old building toward a conclusion. Papa looks at you, she said to Edith, the way he used to look at Mama when he thought she wasn't seeing. The kitchen went very still. Ada found something of great urgency to examine in her schoolbook. Boone cleared his throat. He looked at his book and turned a page and then looked at the page as though he had never seen words arranged in that particular order and found the arrangement surprising. Nell, he said, draw your picture. I am drawing it, Nell said. She looked at Edith. Do you look at him that way too? Nell. His voice had a quality it did not often have. Nell returned to her drawing with the serenity of someone who has said a true thing and has no particular interest in defending it. I'm just asking, she said to the paper. Edith kept her eyes on the mending in her hands. The needle went in and out with the same evenness it had maintained through the whole conversation, which required more attention than it appeared to. Ada turned a page in her schoolbook. She had not read a word on either page. The fire worked. The wind pressed at the windows. After a considerable period of time, during which nobody said anything and Boone did not look up from his book and Edith did not look up from her mending and Nell drew with complete contentment, Boone stood and said he wanted to check on the horse and went outside, and the back door closed behind him. Nell watched him go. She looked at Edith. She opened her mouth. Draw your picture, Edith said. Nell drew her picture. He came to find her that evening after the girls were in bed. She was at the kitchen table with the lamp low and the mending finished and nothing particular in her hands. He sat across from her and was quiet, the quiet of a man who had been thinking about something since Wednesday and had run out of reasons not to say it. I want to ask you something, he said. All right. He looked at her directly, no performance in it. Just the plainness of a man who has decided that dressing a thing up would be an insult to the person he was saying it to. I want you to stay, he said. Not for the 90 days. Not for the girls, though it's for the girls too. He put his hands flat on the table. I want you to stay because this kitchen is not the same room it was before you were in it, and I don't want to find out what it goes back to without you. He held her gaze. I'm asking you to marry me. Not to fix anything. Because I want my name to be yours. The lamp burned between them. Edith looked at his hands on the table. The carpenter's hands, the ones that had folded a blanket carefully and got it nearly right, the ones that had walked Ada to school one morning without explanation and not stopped walking her since. Yes, she said. The same way she had said it on the street, plain and complete, nothing held back. He nodded once. The corner of his mouth moved. They married on a Saturday in November when the first real cold had come and the sky was the particular blue that follows a week of gray. Small ceremony, the church in Millhaven, the people who had stayed. Mrs. Greer in the third row. Vera Holt was in the back. She had come to watch. She watched Edith's face through the whole of it and found nothing there she could use, and that was the end of whatever she had been planning. Ada stood beside them at the front with her hands clasped in front of her and her face doing the thing it did when she was feeling something she had decided was private. Nell in her good dress with the blue ribbon tied correctly for once, her coat pocket holding the courthouse drawing because she could not leave it behind and the occasion seemed to call for it. Afterward they walked back through Millhaven's Main Street, past the dry goods, past the boarding house, past the place where Vera Holt had stood with her voice built for distance and used all of it. Edith did not look at the spot. She did not need to. Boone's hand was at the small of her back, not gripping, just present, in the way of something that has found where it belongs and is not planning to be elsewhere. Nell walked ahead talking about the chimney on the church and whether all important buildings had chimneys or only some and what the rule was exactly, and nobody answered because nobody knew, and she talked about it all the way to the edge of town. Ada walked beside Edith, close enough that their arms touched, which was not an accident and both of them knew it and neither of them said so, because some things are better carried quietly than spoken aloud. That evening Nell added one last drawing to the shelf. For figures at the gate. The gate open. The chimney with smoke going straight up. She examined it from a short distance, made one small correction to the smoke, and put it back. That's all of us, she said, to no one in particular, and went to bed. Boone looked at the drawing on the shelf. He looked at Edith at the table with her mending basket where it had lived for weeks, the lamp between them, the kitchen doing what the kitchen did. Edith Garrett, he said, quietly, testing it the way you say a new thing that fits. She did not look up from the mending. Yes, she said. Outside the cold settled over the yard and the smoke went straight up and the gate stood open in the dark the way Nell had always drawn it. Ready, and waiting for no one, because everyone was already home.